Hello and welcome to Stuff You Should Know About Oil and Gas Production. This podcast is brought to you by Kimray. You can visit us at kimray.com to see our full slate of training materials, quick tips, other videos. On this episode, we're going to answer some customer questions. Why is my pump stalling out, my glycol pump? Why use insulation on piping and valves? What is a LACT unit? What does that do? And what is the best regulator use as a suction controller on my natural gas compressor? My name is Curtis Winkle. I'm here with Kyle Andrews. What's up, Kyle?
How are you, Curtis?
Doing great.
I heard you had a birthday recently.
I did, and
How old?
I turned 41. 40's been really good to me so far. We had a great dinner. We tried some octopus. You ever had
No,
octopus tentacles?
I haven't, but that's not something I'm interested in.
That was good. And then we watched my favorite 80s movie about BMX biking. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, it's called,
I know what BMX is.
Okay.
I don't have any idea about that movie.
So put this on your list.
Okay.
It's a movie called Rad. All right.
Sounds very 80s.
It's very 80s. There's a whole, they go to prom and they're bike dancing at prom. I mean, it's need I say more, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to watch it tonight. So,
Straight to the top of my list. I've got about a month and a half left
Yeah.
of being in my 20s.
All right. That is so young.
I don't feel like it.
Okay.
It's amazing how in the last couple of years, and it's probably because I have a lot of kids, how much my body has started to hurt just doing things.
Okay. Yeah.
But I guess that's just, the point I'm at in my life.
Wow. Okay. That makes me feel even older. So appreciate that. No, that's good. Well, the subject we want to talk about today, we've got some more customer questions. So again, this is something that is a key part of your job. And the guys that you're working with is just trying to help customers support after the sale. Just what can we do to help you do your job better, optimize your operation, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so we've got, what are we going to do? 4, I think, today. So the first one, this is a call you got recently, and the question was, why is my pump stalling out? And so can you just take us through kind of the first question and that conversation to diagnose what was going on there? So glycol pump.
Yeah, glycol pump. So a customer called me and started walking through the conditions they had on site, giving me the working pressure, the circulation rate they were trying to achieve, just the symptoms that the pump was showing. And the pump would stroke a few times on startup, but then quit working at all. And come to find out, the operating pressure that the absorber was working at was right on the line of the minimum working pressure for that pump. And so it would stroke a few times, but then end up stalling out. Something I suggested to him doing and trying was trying to lower the back pressure that's on the pump. So by back pressure, I mean the amount of pressure that the pump has to push against. So you have to overcome your operating pressure of the absorber, and you also have to overcome, pushing the glycol through all the filters, the flash separator, pushing it through all of those pipings and different fittings. That all creates back pressure on this pump. And if you get to a certain point, it'll actually stall the pump out. So because of the lower operating pressure of the tower, I suggested changing out filters, lowering the operating pressure of the flash separator. All of those things will lower the back pressure put on the pump. He had already done a lot of those things, new filters. The flash separator was pretty much as low as it could have gone. So come to find out, he actually only had 2 options. He could buy a smaller pump that had a lower operating pressure, or he could buy a conversion kit to sleeve down his existing pump. So he had a PV pump, or a pressure volume pump.
Yeah.
We also make small cylinder pumps, or SC pumps. Basically, it's just a sleeved down version of the same pump, but has a much lower operating pressure. So you can operate that, at much lower pressures and still work right.
Is that a challenging process to sleeve down?
It
pretty
can
complex
be
pump.
Yeah, to get to the point where you're just taking out the cylinders, it's not too bad. Some people have done it in the field, probably easier to do it in a shop.
Sure.
but you're going to be shut down for a while, making that conversion.
Yeah. So did he end up? Do you know what he ended up doing at the end?
I don't, and
Okay.
that's one of the challenges of this job. Usually, when you give suggestions and tips and possible solutions for people, a lot of the time they'll, no news is good news. It's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, they haven't called me back and told me they're still having issues, so I assume that it's gone, the way they wanted it to. But yeah, I assume everything went just fine.
All right, very good. So either get a new pump or sleeve down is the kind of phrase for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Go to a small cylinder pump.
Yeah.
And a lot of the issues that people see with dehydration is that, and I think we talked about this earlier, was in the wintertime when production and demand for natural gas goes up. That's when people start calling us, oh man, I need to get my dehy up and running, and they start resetting all this equipment and run into issues. Definitely, it's a good idea to maybe in the fall, before cold weather really hits, get your equipment operating, get it working, make sure everything is running smoothly, so that way when gas demand goes up, you're ready for that and you can start producing quickly.
So will some operators actually turn it off during summer months if it's
Yep.
not?
Yeah, if demand, if nobody's willing to buy their gas, gas demand goes way down during the summertime. Some will just shutting completely.
Close the ball valve, close the well.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, close off the gas.
Okay.
They can still, if it's an oil producing well, they can still produce the oil.
Okay.
But yeah, just during the summer months, it's just not in demand as much.
Sure. Makes sense. All right, our second question today has to do with insulation wrapping on pipes and valves. So of course we have a video about tips for cold weather production, and this is a comment on that video about so why, if we're going to use wrapping insulation on our pipes and valves, wouldn't it be good to leave insulation off? Would it be better to leave insulation off of it so that it can be exposed to warmer temperatures?
Right.
If there's a pressure drop inside, would we want to really wrap that? Wouldn't that keep the cold in? Mm-hmm. So really good question. So how would you answer that?
And he was really framing this around the JT effect. So with large pressure drops are going to have temperature loss. And his thought was, well, if you have a large internal pressure cut and therefore a large temperature drop or loss, why would you want to insulate that and basically keep the cold in? It'd be like an ice chest, right? At that point, you're keeping the cold in. But really why people use insulation and even CACO heaters is because they're either heating the process fluid prior to that pressure cut, and they want to contain that heat, keep the heat inside, or because of cold ambient temperatures. So it's like already below freezing outside, so any heat that's in that process flow, they want to keep in that process flow. So that's really why people use insulation for both pipes and valves. It's really for cold ambient temperatures and to keep the heat inside. Maybe if you're in warmer climates,
don't see it as much probably.
Yeah, don't see it as much, because if the ambient temperature is warmer than your process flow, then yeah, absolutely, that's a natural heat exchange you can use to your advantage.
Right.
But especially in colder months, in certain climates, you want to insulate to keep the heat in as much as possible.
Makes perfect sense. Just like people, right? They
That's
need
right.
Jackets if it's cold.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right. Next question today, Kyle, has to do with LACT units. So this is kind of towards the end of an upstream operation. Are these units called LACT units, LACT? So
Yeah.
what is that? How do they work? What are they for?
Yep, so a LACT unit is a lease automatic custody transfer. So it's used to transfer custody of oil from the producer to another company, usually a midstream company. It can go straight from the LACT unit into an oil pipeline, or a truck can come and connect to it and take it from the LACT unit. So what it does is it measures the BS&W content of the oil, so basic sediment and waste, or basic sediment and water, and make sure that that's at an appropriate level. So prior to the LACT unit, there's first and second stage separation that takes place. We're separating out the gas and the water from the oil. And so the LACT unit measures not only the volume that's being sold so that, that you can track how much you're selling and charge the appropriate amount, but it also tests for BS&W. And if it's not passing the test and it's not up to snuff, it'll actually recirculate it back through the system, either put it back into storage in the bad oil tank, or recirculate it through from the very beginning of the system through the separation process to try to clean it up.
Gotcha. So that'll be a prior agreed upon contractual thing, like a quality measurement. It's going to have this amount maximum
Correct.
BS&W.
Yeah, usually it's a certain percentage. Like, hey, I don't want over this percentage BS&W, and as long as they're meeting that, it goes through the unit into a pipeline or into a truck. If it's not, it actually will switch a ball valve and divert that flow elsewhere.
All right, very good. So that's a LACT unit. Our last question for today has to do with gas compression. So what is the best regulator for my natural gas compressor?
Yeah, so a suction controller on a natural gas compressor is really critical to the operation of that compressor. So it has a very narrow window of operation. So with our standard pressure reducing regulator for suction control valve on a compressor, let's say your suction pressure set point is 30 psi. The upstream side of that valve is at 100 psi. As long as it stays at 100 psi, your set point of 30 psi will never drift one way or the other. But because it has an 8-to-1 set point drift ratio, for every 8 pounds the upstream changes or fluctuates, the set point is going to drift by 1 psi. So if the upstream goes from 100 pounds to 108 pounds, your set point is going to go from 30 pounds to 31 pounds, which maybe 1 pound or 2 pounds, either way isn't that big of a deal. You're still in that narrow window of operation. But if the upstream pressure changes by 100 pounds, that's a big deal. Your set point's going to go way out of that, scope of operation for the suction control.
Could that change? Is that based on well pressure or slugs, or what's the...
Right. So it could be whatever is upstream of the compressor, whatever line is feeding the compressor. That could be, coming from separation equipment, which could be affected by slugs of fluid or slugs of gas coming into that equipment. It could be maybe something is sharing that line. It's a common line between different compressors. And so, if you have a bank of, 5 compressors and 2 of them are running, and then all of a sudden they shut down and only one is running, you might get a surge of pressure. Or if they all kick on at once, you're going to take away that pressure. And so any fluctuation in upstream pressure with the standard regulator is going to make your set point fluctuate. Now, the ideal regulator to use in this scenario is the PRB, or pressure reducing balanced valve. So that has a 100-to-1 ratio. And so the upstream pressure has to change by 100 pounds for the set point to drift by 1 psi. So it's a much wider ratio, and it allows for more fluctuation of upstream pressure and it not affect the valve.
Very good. Okay, so to recap, why is my pump stalling out? You said, hey, check all your filters on your glycol pump, check all your filters, make sure that pressure is appropriate for your glycol pump.
Correct, and just make sure that you're within the operating parameters of the pump you have.
If not, your options are get an appropriately sized pump or convert your current pump.
Yeah, or sleeve down your pump.
Sleeve down. Why use insulation on pipes and valves where if it's warm outside, you don't need it. But if you've got cold ambient temperatures below freezing, it's a good idea to either wrap with insulation, or what we typically recommend is using a catalytic heater.
Yeah.
And then what is a LACT unit? Least automatic transfer custody.
Custody transfer.
Custody transfer, LACT. All right, so that's where the oil, it's just oil?
Yep,
Okay.
just oil.
So where oil transfers from typically an upstream producer to a midstream company for transportation or storage or whatever. And then set point drift. What is the best regulator for a suction control valve on a compressor? And we said the PRB, pressure reducing balanced regulator. Got all that right?
Yep.
Okay.
You're right on the money.
Anything else you'd add?
Nope.
All right. Great. So I hope you enjoyed this episode where we answered just some common customer questions. If you have a question that you would like answered, we would love to do that. So if you could send us an email at podcast@kimray.com, we'll make sure to get you an answer straight away from Kyle or one of our other experts. And then we'll also feature your question on our next episode of Customer Questions for the podcast. For Kyle Andrews, I'm Curtis Winkle. We'll catch you next time on Stuff You Should Know About Oil and Gas Production.